Hi, everyone. This is Michael Rochelle, Chief Strategy Officer and Principal Analyst here at the Brandon Hall Group, joining you with another Excellence at Work podcast. And I have on with me one of my favorite companions in this journey of the podcast we do. John, how are you today?
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful day here in Edinburgh, and it's a little warm. So if you see me breaking out into a sweat, you know why.
I hear that. I'm up here in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm looking out my office window and finally having some nice weather. It only took until the beginning of August to get there, so keep our fingers crossed. But John, I'm gonna let you introduce who you are, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today with the audience.
Sure thing. Well, I'm privileged to be the CEO of a company called Administrate. We have a training management platform that we primarily sell to large, complex, usually multinational enterprises, and it basically helps training teams solve all the problems that are inherent in planning and scheduling huge amounts of classroom training. So we don't focus on e-learning at all. There's great LMSs out there, many of whom are our partners, but we're really trying to solve that scheduling problem of you've got a plan and you've got people that need to be at the right place at the right time, and something goes wrong, an instructor gets sick or a piece of equipment goes out of service and you need to solve that. And so that's what our software helps folks do at scale.
And I will add to your resume that you're one of the best thought leaders out there on the space. So it's always enjoyable to talk to you, see what your perspective is.
Thank you.
So let's talk about what we're going to talk about. So we're going to kind of dig into, you and I have had this conversation before and with your team about, AI and automation not necessarily being the same thing. How's it being used right now, to solve these complex training operational problems? And kind of getting at the fact that that operational layer of training management is where the true training costs live. And we got to figure out how to iron that out, get rid of that cost, make it frictionless. So I think it's a super timely topic. And I think more and more people out there in the HR community, learning and development community, understanding the complexity and difficulty with managing training. So the first question I have for you, you've oftentimes said to me in discussions that we've had is the operational layer training is where the real costs hide, especially when it's instructor-led training. So what does that actually look like day to day for a large training team?
That's a great question. And it's kind of interesting because I think this is a problem that for many of us has been a lot closer than we've ever originally thought. All of us have gone to, well, most of us have gone to significant amounts of school. Some of us have gone to college and so forth. And so we've been in these learning environments and we see the kind of work and the cost that exists in classroom training all around us, but we never really think about it. And so just to visualize that, when you think about running classes at scale, there might be 20, 30 classes going on at a facility. I was just visiting with a customer over in Glasgow, actually. They do truck driver training, so license for large trucks and forklifts and things like that. They might have 20 to 30 classes going on at any given moment across their facility. And this is just a huge amount of work to coordinate and get right, because you have to have the right equipment, the right truck at the right place, because they're doing various exercises and things like backing up a truck and so forth. And if you don't have these things all lined up, all of a sudden everything grinds to a halt, right? You can't actually run the training. Even more routine things like were the meals ordered correctly and did the vegetarian meal arrive and so forth. It's a very involved process to make sure that these people get to the right place at the right time. And what tends to happen is this devolves into spreadsheets. And for each one of these tasks, there might be a person managing a spreadsheet to try to keep all this stuff together. And that kind of back and forth dialogue with learners, dialogue with instructors. Can you do this training at this place and this time? Can you come to this rescheduled training? Oh, I'm sorry you're sick. We'll book you on the next available. All of that stuff lives in spreadsheets, emails, phone calls, people's heads, whiteboards even. And that's where the cost just explodes out, and to a degree that many folks just don't quite realize. I think the stats that we tend to track say something like 70 or 80% of all the spend for classroom training is on admin work. And it's admin work in the form of people and bodies. It's admin work in the form of time. And that just is wild when you really think about it. So I've talked a lot, but one of the things that we are seeing a lot of is there is more and more of the kind of self-paced, self-directed training is starting to melt out and away from the LMS maybe, right? And so you're learning more from AI assistants and things like that, but the classroom training component is the thing that you're not putting an AI in front of a class of real people yet. And you just have to have these things in the right place, and they have to be ready to go. There might be prep time and teardown time, and all of that is what just contributes to this explosion in cost.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. We see the same thing, and I think you're probably hearing the same term as everyone's equating that to the word friction. Like everything has a lot of friction, a lot of aerodynamic drag, whatever metaphor you want to use, but it doesn't go smoothly. So
No,
it's not just those direct costs of like, I've got this many people doing this much training and, that's super expensive. It's much deeper than that. It's, the words like optimization and maximization and efficiency. And so it is a kind of bump and grind, process still. And I think you're right. Those hidden costs, that's where we don't get deep on the spreadsheet. You're not going to get that level of insights. And so it kind of leads to another question I had for you was, so if we get in a time machine and go back 2 or 3 years and look at the way we've been doing things, and then fast forward to AI and automation, you've been watching this for a long, long time. What can we do today that seemed out of reach even just a couple years ago?
yeah. So it's such a broad question, isn't it? But
Hmm.
I tend to narrow it down within our context to kind of focus on the high value things that are often mundane or error prone or difficult to do. And with the caveat that for us, because we don't care about content, we care about it, but we don't deal with any sort of content authoring or things like that. And our customers, put their content into our platform, but we're not worried about that because we focus on the operational kind of realities that are unfolding. We really narrow that question of AI and automation down to what we can automate and be certain is correct. And so a lot of the challenge the last 2 or 3 years has been that as amazing as these AI models are and using various LLMs and so forth can be really transformative, if you have to make sure that a certain person is at a certain place at a certain time and that all of these things are lined up, you cannot afford to have errors because that means people will be booking plane tickets to arrive at the wrong place at the wrong time and so forth. And these models do tend to struggle with hallucinations and so forth. And so a lot of our effort has been put towards how do we get these answers and this engagement to be as deterministic as possible based on the facts that we know about the situation that we hold within our platform, and how do we automate as much as possible while again having confidence that these things will go the way that they need to. And then how do you marry them together? How can you have AI working with your automation and your team and so forth and still have humans in the loop? And so that's for us the really interesting problem to solve is we've got very powerful ways to automate that actually didn't exist within our platform until a couple years ago. We have a very powerful application of AI models, and then we've got folks that are wanting to do a great job, but also sit in the middle of these things and make sure that they've got some oversight. So that's been our challenge over the last couple of years.
And it's interesting too, as you kind of work through that. Do you think that people, and this is just kind of a side question, is do you think comfortability gets in the way of automating? People just are like, I know this person does this for a long time. They're using spreadsheets. I don't feel comfortable moving to an AI or automated, process. Do you think that that's some of the pull that even, like I'll trade familiarity for the unknown and potential improvement?
Totally. I mean, that behavior modification is so difficult, right, for all of us. I try to instill like one or two habits that are new a year, right? And
Hmm.
usually fail on one or two of them. And I think that when you know we never walk into a broken process, right? These companies and organizations are doing a good job in the main on training. It's just expensive and time consuming and often frustrating. And so if it's not broken, it can be very scary to try something new that is completely outside of the comfort zone. And I think that's where, and many of us have used these things in our personal lives. You know, I don't know about you, but I've got a ChatGPT account that solely exists to basically generate pictures of that are look like Legos that basically I just make fun of my friends with, right? And it's just like, and it's great and I love it, but
Yeah.
it makes mistakes all the time, and you get people with three arms and all kinds of stuff. And so when you start experiencing this kind of variance that you can get, and something that worked yesterday won't work the same way again today, that can be really concerning. And so I think that's where our strategy has been to just say, look, let's start in areas that are provable and executable. All right. And for me, I don't use AI a lot in things like Googling or trying to find answers to stuff, just because I found that my tolerance for inaccurate information is pretty low, right? I'd rather
Hmm.
just search and spend that time myself and get it. But I use AI quite a lot on writing code. And the reason that I like that is because it gives me some code. It says, here's what you wanted. And I say, great. And I just hit the run button. And then I can see the results right there. And so that's where that was an early clue for us that this is a pretty nice way of working, because it's much easier to critique than it is to create. And if we could get into that kind of feedback loop almost of saying, hey, we've got to update everybody and push their registration out by 2 days, right? We got to update some session date and time. If that can be very cumbersome, and even in our platform at times that means you're going in, if you have 15 students or 50 students, you're clicking through 50 rows and doing things 50 times, and it's way better than a spreadsheet, but it still takes you a few minutes. And so we wanted to explore areas where those kind of bulk operations could then be run and presented back to the user and say, here's what we're going to do. And then that gives me confidence, because I'm sitting there and I can review the plan or whatever it is, and I can say, okay, go execute it. And then we would log it. And so then if there's any problem that came around from that. And so, this kind of idea that like you should always be able to execute what the AI is giving you is really core to our strategy for marrying up these two pieces with automation and also artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it kind of begs the question, that everyone's bringing up, which is there's a lot of hype around AI that it thinks. But in reality, we really know what it's doing is it's really good for like large repeatable tasks or big computations. It's not truly thinking. It's more of a reflection. When you're talking to folks, that's kind of a difficult road to navigate, right? You could end up, you could end up off the road on either side of it. How do you right size AI for what you're doing, but not necessarily undersell it?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, right? And we probably have gotten it wrong on various different sides of the line over the last couple of years. I think where we have done a good job, though, is from day one, we just made it a conscious strategy to say all of our AI features, all of the features that use LLMs, will be completely opt-in, completely optional. You will never be forced to have that appear within your instance of Administrate. Because even as for myself, like all of a sudden, you get the little AI icon appears and you're like, great, now my toaster has AI or whatever. And so making those things kind of opt in and optional, I think was a good decision and has been embraced. And it's like it's there if you want to use it or not. And also if folks want to use their own model, they can bring their own model to bear. So that kind of removes a lot of this kind of existential dread over where's my data going and sovereignty and all that stuff. And I think the second piece of our strategy has been that we invested early on a layer that was designed essentially to summarize everything that happen within the platform. And we call it insights. And it's actually this amazing framework that we white label, that's written by a startup here in Edinburgh, a friend of mine. And it basically just takes a feed of what has happened within Administrate, and it's deterministic, and it's just, you can say what you care about, what you don't care about, and then that surfaces up to you in the form of updates on the dashboard, or here's what happened yesterday, or here's what happened last week, here's what's going to happen, and so you can tune this to the things that you care about. And that was a really good decision, I think, early on, because then it meant that as we started layering more and more things that could be done, you would feel like you had tabs on what can be a very chaotic environment. One of the most difficult things for a training team is sometimes just figuring out what's going on. And so a lot of our customers set up reports that come out every Monday morning and say, here's what's going to happen this week. And they're all segmented down by region and team and all that. By having some automation and summarization, which LLMs are actually very, very good at if they're provided the right inputs, that I think built trust early on and meant that people were a little bit more comfortable playing around with things.
And so it begs the question, there's kind of an interesting intersection now. Like, you've been working with organizations for a long time to show them how to scale, but also chase the holy grail of, return on investment with training operations. And now AI is introduced to the picture. And now we talk to organizations all the time that now have AI targets for return on investment. If we're going to invest in all this upskilling, reskilling with AI, going to bring in AI-driven technologies, what's the actual ROI on AI? Can you really, is the use case of training management and getting training operations under control, is that the ideal use case for ROI for using AI?
I think it's just another use case, right?
Okay.
And there's all this arguing back and forth, and I think a lot of it is just posturing, right? Which is, are we an AI native company or not, or is our product AI native or not? And I maybe that matters, that debate, but we don't really view it that way, because fundamentally, a lot of what we're talking about is, solving this problem that airlines need to solve every day, right? Which is, you've got a certain number of planes flying to various destinations. They need to be full of people, and they need to be crewed, and they need to be maintained, and all that. And it's essentially the same problem that we're trying to solve alongside our customers. And there's that rubber meets the road reality, which is, you've got various containers, classrooms. They need to have various things in order to run, various instructors with various qualifications. And so you're trying to fit this puzzle in. It's a big Tetris game, right? And so for us, the fact that AI can help play that game of Tetris at a significantly faster pace, while still running within the rules of the game. You can't just book on a random instructor that doesn't have the right qualification, because our platform will say no. And so that's a level of trust that gets built, right? And that we can bring to bear. I think the structure and the way that training operations are modeled and organized is still so important for solving that problem. And we've run tests on this. We do this all the time, which is like, we'll just say, hey, here's my students and here's the classes. Can you figure out a training plan? And it just doesn't work very well. At least it doesn't work very well at scale, not at the scale that our customers operate at. And so I think that for us, ROI was always a difficult one with training. The cost side is a little bit easier to instrument, but to say how much business impact in my training programs last year, drive, that is very difficult to prove, and so forth. And so for us, when you look at just training operations in general, the metrics that we really hone in on is, after a year or 18 months or 2 years of Administrate, or 6 months, are you delivering more training with the same number of resources? And what we have found is that most customers, the kind of the bare minimum is 50% more training in whatever time frame you pick. And it usually goes up again after that. So maybe first year you'll do 50% more, and then second year you'll double or triple. And some customers just go off like a rocket. And you said the word friction earlier. I remember 4 or 5 years ago, I said, marketing team, I got this great idea to talk about, when we do demos to customers, and we'll talk about the coefficient, the frictional coefficient of training delivery, right? And we would say we'll keep that constant or we'll make it go down. If you remember from physics, the coefficient of friction is the thing that you're solving for. And they're like, this is terrible, and they were right. But that concept of friction is, we want to hold it steady or drive it down. And if we can see that, hey, the number of the amount of money you're spending and the number of bodies that you have to deliver this training is staying the same, and yet the volume and the quality of training is going up, then that's a huge win. And those are kind of the two general ways that we think about that. And so AI is just an input to that, I guess, to answer your question from our point of view.
Yeah, which kind of begs the issue of, so if I've gotten on board with all of this, I still have to make a tech decision, right? And it just seems like there's an ocean of tech that heads of learning, technical people have to go through their teams to make a decision. Taking it from the buyer point of view, I've got a couple questions for you, kind of like a combo, is how do you actually know that you're making the right investment, especially with how things are transforming and changing so quickly? Like, how do you really know you're not going to regret your decision in 6 months? And then how do you differentiate between like foundationally picking a great company like yours to work with versus chasing features that eventually could go away or be absorbed or just become incremental? Because as you know, you go through the selection process all the time. Companies are just still geared towards, they do this, let me compare it to this. There's still that features and compare it. It just seems like it's harder than ever. How do you cut through all of that? What advice can you give people that are looking at bringing on a training management system like yours? Like, how do you cut through all that?
Yeah, it's a hard question, but I think there's actually a simple answer, and it's become more clear over the last couple of years, at least for me. Uh, and that is, I have this philosophy that we started putting into practice at Administrate way back in 2016. And that was that we signed up this company, a customer at the time called ForgeRock. They've now merged with Ping, and so they're one of the largest identity management companies in the world. And it was really fortuitous because they had a very aggressive training team, and the leader there is now retired, wanted to keep the team small, but he also wanted to innovate, and they were growing really, really quickly. They went from Series A to public in like 8 or 9 years. And today in the UK, if you process an open banking transaction, it's being the credentials and stuff are being validated by a ForgeRock or a Ping piece of software. And so there was, and I'll connect these two threads in just a second, but prior to being an Administrate, I was the CTO of a healthcare technology company. And this was in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And, software as a service was not a thing really. I mean, you had web-based software and stuff, but Salesforce was just getting going, for example. And I remember we bought various pieces of software like a bug tracker and a training platform and a few other things that we needed. And what I quickly learned was that as a CTO, we were growing quickly, and I would call up the vendor and say, hey, it'd be great if we could have this feature. This is an obvious thing that would save us tons of time. And they would say, yeah, okay, that's going to go on the backlog and might get to it in a year. And I felt like this prisoner, at the time. And so I was very acutely aware of that feeling, and I wanted to never inflict that feeling on any of our customers. And so our strategy to serve customers like ForgeRock that had all these demands and they wanted to innovate and do all these great things, and our reality is as a small company at the time, not having infinite bandwidth and also not wanting to prevent the innovation and kind of make Kevin and his team over at ForgeRock feel like they were in an Administrate-shaped prison, was to go API first in how we thought about our platform. And so in 2016, we said, that's it. Everything must be built to be accessible through an API, and it's going to be the same API that our customers get access to that we use to build our own product. And that was a difficult decision at the time. That was, we had some legacy tech. It was almost a year of no net new features because we had to go and build out the various API pieces that we needed. And at the time, that seemed like a sound technical decision, but as we entered the age of AI, I think that has become one of the most important differentiators that you can have when you're selecting a piece of software. And that is, the software will not do everything that you want it to do today. Well, nobody's ever 100%. We aim for kind of 80, 85% on RFPs, and that's a lot higher than some other platforms can provide. And what we have seen is that not only can we hook up our own agents and LLMs and stuff to the platform, but customers can do that as well. And so they can do things that, we have no interest in doing, and they can do them relatively easily because they have access to the API, and they can do it safely because the API is validating the things that they're doing. And we even have gone to the point where, okay, we don't necessarily want to even require our customers to be super technical and have engineering teams at their beck and call. And so we've white labeled a product called N8N, and we branded it as Administrate Automator, and that allows you to do kind of drag and drop programming and it's deeply integrated within Administrate, the platform. And so these kind of things that we see have just been transformative for us. Both of these strategies kind of converged starting about a year and a half ago, and it has depressurized the relationship between us and key customers, because now they have an escape hatch if they want, and they have a way to get things done. And it's also meant that we could then focus and double down even more so on our core things around the API and so forth, and then provide them, more. And so we start to get a flywheel going where we focus on the things that only we can do, and then they focus on the things that are custom to their business process or whatever. And so that was a really long-winded way. But for us, when we evaluate vendors, we just moved our knowledge base, for example, from a vendor that everybody knows that did not have a very good API and did not have very good API coverage, to another vendor that everybody knows that has excellent API support. And that has just been transformative for us. And so that's probably the number one thing that I look for. And it's even starting to annoy me in my personal life, right? Because my bank in the US does not have any API support for consumers. But I would like to be able to log in and write some code and download my stuff and see it and analyze it, whatever. And so, in the future, if I'm switching banks, even in my personal life, I want to make that decision that I want something that exposes an API surface to me that I can then feed into Claude or, Copilot or whatever.
That's an interesting thought, especially for a banking app, which has got to be the most, single generation, knew that a long time ago, gateway that's on anybody's phone or device. That's like the Stone Age when you log on to your banking app.
Yeah.
Not picking on banks, but it is true. I think they know it as well. Last question for you. It's kind of like mixing a couple of different ideas together. From your perspective, what does the ideal tech stack look like for learning and development going forward? And where do you think the big use case is for AI in that tech stack?
Yeah, so this will probably be counter to a lot of the folks that you hear out there. We've all got our biases and motivations, so whatever, take it with a grain of salt. But I have almost no interest in AI applied to the realms of content creation or repurposing learning material from one format to another. I think that is not great. I think it's we've got a rule at Administrate now that if I can tell that you've run it through Claude, then you've lost, right? And I'm not going to read it, and you got to redo and do it again. And I think that's that's just one of those things that I don't feel like is very high value, right? Where I find a lot of value is in using AI to drive those business processes that might be time consuming, difficult, might require scenarios, 4 or 5 different ways to solve the same problem. And I'll give you an example, right? We've got this, we call it the Administrate AI Assistant, and it's in beta testing right now. Any of our customers can use it. But we just shipped 2 updates to it, which I was pretty pleased with, and our customers have been really, really positive about. And the first is it can just build you a report. So we've always had a report builder that you could go in and drag and drop, build a report and say, I want every data element within the platform is exposed. But, it's kind of complicated, and you have to really understand how entities hook together and things like that. And so now you can just say to the bot, hey, build me a report that shows me this, 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 and this. And it will whir away and say, okay, here it is, go check it out. And that go check it out exercise means that you are then going and validating what you see. It's deterministic. That report shell is not going to change once it's saved, you know? And we did the same thing for our email templating engine, where we've got a very robust email templating engine that you can trigger off of a whole bunch of things, like if a learner registers or passes or advances down a learning path. And the problem with it is we hooked up a complete templating engine. It's Jinja, it's open source, so a lot of web designers know how to use it and are familiar with it. But a lot of training people, people who are running learning operations are not, right? And they should ever be. But we basically hooked it up and said, okay, like now you can say, I'd like a template that shows me all the instructors that are attached to this course and put that in an email that's going to go out on registration. And it can build out the template and it shows it to you and you can preview it and check it and whatever. And again, so not only can you get your email done in, 10, 15 seconds versus maybe it might take you a whole day to do that, but now you can do that for way more emails, and you can have 15 emails go out through the life of your course that are all very, very specific and so forth. And that improves learner perception, that improves training outcomes, that improves your product as a training team. And so it's kind of like we're getting way more done in a way more powerful way of working that is also verifiable. It's got a human in the loop, and I don't have to worry about it once that work is completed. So those are just two examples, I think, of where we just get really excited. And it's silly, right? We're getting excited about reports being built and email templates, but these things matter, and they're hard to do. So those are just a couple of examples.
Well, John, it's always fun catching up with you and going on this journey with you. Unique insights. I can't imagine anyone who doesn't watch this podcast takes away some real paradigms and how to think through things. So as always, it's a pleasure to have you join us, and look forward to another discussion where we kind of see where this is all going next. But Head of Administrate, John, thank you for joining. It's a pleasure to have you. This is Michael Rochelle, Chief Strategy Officer, Principal Analyst of the Brand Hall Group. Thanks for joining us, and until next time.